verse 8 is kind of a summary of the research that this wise teacher had done. And it's something that we certainly don't normally expect to be hearing from the scriptures. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Then the text goes on, and perhaps there's an editor that even adds a few words here. And then at the end we hear the conclusion of this teacher to all of his research. So he begins in verse 9. Not only was the teacher wise, but also he imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like golds. They're collected sayings like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them, of making many books there is no end, and of much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. This is the word of the Lord. When I was a boy, during the summer after Sunday morning church when we didn't have Sunday school, our clan would gather at Grandpa Palsrock's house. And since my dad had 7 brothers, it was quite a group of uncles and aunts. Men and women gathered in this long living room, of course the women on one end and the men on the other end. I would sit on the floor in the midst of the men listening to the discussion. One time as I was sitting there, they were talking about the right and the wrong of dancing. And the men went on quite a while. My grandfather was sitting over in the corner, probably up into his 80s, small man, white hair, quite frail at this point in time. And he listened, and finally he got up and he went into the center of the circle. And all of us were kind of watching, what's he going to do or say? And he held out his hands and he began dancing. And as he danced, he just kind of moved his arms closer and closer and closer to himself until he had his partner hung very close. Then he stopped, went and sat down, and I suppose that was the end of the discussion as far as he was concerned. Dancing was wrong because it might lead to something else. Well, that's kind of the traditional wisdom that many of us grew up with. Traditional wisdom is the accumulation of knowledge, including moral thinking, which our wisest men and women have attained through their experience and through listening to God. We've all been exposed to it. It teaches us right and wrong from the time we were very small. It told us how we were supposed to live on the path of life. My dad was one of my traditional wise men. Now, our teacher in Ecclesiastes here was also exposed to the traditional wise wisdom of his day from his youth. He had been taught by his elders how he was supposed to live. There was a group of people in that ancient patriarchal society called wise men, and these wise men, as we noted earlier, were the royal advisors, the philosophers of the day, the judges, the elders. They studied nature and history and agriculture and astrology and morality and anything that humanity should know. And these wise men believed that there was a right way to live. There was wisdom for life's path. They believed that the Creator had structured the universe and human life so that there was a natural created order. And the Creator had constructed a moral code for how one was to behave righteously on that path. Therefore, it was important to follow the path that the Creator had established. Now, if you tried to subvert that cosmic order or to break the moral code, they said, you will be in trouble. So if you thought you could defy what today we call gravity and do your own thing and step off a cliff thinking you'd be fine, you'd soon learn that stepping off the path was destructive. If you decided to not cultivate or weed your field, again, it would result in destruction. If you lived immorally, lying or stealing or disobeying your elders, you would be foolish and you'd pay a price. So they said, don't be a fool. Live life according to the traditional wisdom that you have been taught, and you will prosper and not have destruction. Live right, be blessed. Live foolishly, trouble. So, in summary, the wise men, including our grandparents then, and our parents, and our Sunday school teachers, our school teachers, they taught us to walk on the path of righteousness, and we would be blessed. Today, there are many in our society who no longer think this way. Thoughtful people are telling us that we've lost our moral underpinnings. Several years ago, William Bennett wrote 2 books, the Book of Virtues and the Moral Compass, because he believed that moral education in our homes and in our schools was lacking, and he wanted to provide stories to assist the teachers to give better instruction in moral education. Many would agree today that society is drifting without a real moral anchor any longer. Recently, we listened to the congregation or the Congress's hearings where they were interviewing Michael Cohen, who basically said, yes, I got off the path. I lied, I cheated, and I am ashamed of myself. And then he went on to even include the president of our country, saying he too has lost his moral code. Many of us are asking questions about the moral code today. Do we have it? The ancient wise men taught traditional, clear wisdom and said, do not neglect it. If you do, destruction will follow. But many of us found that this traditional wisdom got quite restrictive, didn't we? We did not really question the basic values or the underlying right and wrong of the wisdom that we were taught, but we did question whether all of these rules we were taught were right or necessary. Sometimes we even questioned whether following the moral code would always lead to a blessing. We sometimes felt like we were being forced to live in a kind of a tight box, and we weren't sure we wanted to follow the exact same pattern as the elders had taught us. Now, this is also the way that the teacher who speaks to us in Ecclesiastes felt and thought. He had numerous questions and observations that didn't quite fit into the tight box, the precise pathway that the traditional wise men of Proverbs had taught him. The teachings and the answers of the traditional wisdom did not satisfy his mind, and they seemed to confine his life, and they often didn't even make sense to him. So let's call this teacher the complex wise man, in contrast to the traditional wise man. So this teacher set out to observe the way things actually happened out there in the universe. Did walking on the right path always lead to a longer life, to more prosperity, to more joy, to more meaning? After he pursued this wisdom and folly, he said that he just ended up chasing after the wind. He didn't get the answers he wanted, but rather he said, I was filled with sorrow and grief. So he went on to pursue a great many other things in life, laughter and wine and great projects and work and gardens and harems and music and everything else under the sun on life's path. All these too, he said, ended up in chasing the wind. There was simply meaninglessness in his hands and on his mind. So he went on one more time to pursue advancement, riches, ruling a kingdom, even friendship, with the same result. He noticed that whether you walked on the pathway of the foolish or on the pathway of the righteous, you ended with the same fate, death. Death was the common destiny of all, so our text began. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Now, he's not alone in raising questions about the traditional wisdom of the day. Think of the book of Job. The traditional wise men came to Job and told him that he must have sinned and gotten off from the right path. That's why you're suffering. Job says, no way. I'm blameless. It's true I'm not perfect, but I've done nothing to deserve this suffering. You traditional wise men are wrong, and you're making my life more miserable. When I was in seminary, I had professors like this complex wise man. Professor Staub taught apologetics and ethics, and he would raise the tough questions to make us think about traditional wisdom. Was it okay to overtly lie to a soldier standing at the door when you were hiding a Jew during World War II? Professor Hugen taught pastoral care and would raise questions about the complexity of people and the ambiguities of life situations. How do you know, he would say, when to break your marital oath till death do us part and seek a divorce? What's the relationship between responsibility and sickness in addiction? Both men raise questions about human suffering and the presence of evil. Now, we all know that evil has invaded the world. Early Genesis tells us that the curse has come into the natural order and injured it. And it tells us that evil has invaded us, tempting us to go our own way rather than living according to God's moral code. So evil will produce questions often and ambiguity. But recently I had a call from a man in misery. His medical condition was poor. His family members were in trouble. He said that he prayed night after night, and he tried to live faithfully to God, walking on the right path. But nothing happens. Is God not listening? Why doesn't he keep his promises? Is he punishing me for the sins of my youth? Suffering, too, produces questions in our minds. Don't we sometimes, too, feel in situations of life that the answers are simply blowing in the wind? We wrestle and wrestle with our doubts and our questions and come up empty. I know people who say in the midst of their questions and in their suffering, it is all meaningless. It just doesn't make sense. Some people live their whole lives this way, on the edge of it, as they look at the story of their life unfolding and say, this doesn't make sense. How can it be part of a plan of God? So we know many people have thrown off their traditional wisdom altogether and no longer walk on the path as they were taught. They've rejected not only the church, but their faith and the path of righteousness. Don't talk to me about this spirituality stuff, this morality stuff. Just live, that's all there is today. There's a lot of scientists today who say, look, this is reality, this is what is. Stop talking to me about all that other stuff. But we need to see that meaninglessness is not the final conclusion for the complex wise man. He pushes on through all those questions and doubts and proceeds further down the path of life and begins to come out on the other side. After he tells us everything is meaningless, after he tells us his research was like chasing after the wind, he goes on to say a bit more. Our texts tell us that his pondering and his searching resulted in his writing down his own proverbs added to the traditional wise man's proverbs. Those earlier words of the traditional wise man and the words of the complex wise man, the text says, Both are upright and true. They are goads to get us thinking, guides to life's path. Ultimately, it says they come to us from one shepherd who leads us through life. So his conclusion is that learning from those elders, but also asking the tough questions about life is worthwhile. We know this, don't we? An unthinking mind is a shallow mind. Blindly following the rules of life without having those values in our hearts is a legalistic way to live. Unless we open up our minds and our hearts to the deeper issues of life, to the deepest ways of God in the world and as an activity, to the best moral answers, our spirituality and our walk on life is not very satisfying. The pursuit of wisdom for life's path, he says, is really good for your soul. That's his first conclusion. But he goes even further with his second. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of mankind. So after all is said and done, after all the research, all the teachings of the proverbial wise man are good as well, he concludes. A wise person, he says, just like Proverbs says, starts with the fear of God. You're not wise if you don't have faith. He's agreeing then with the traditional wise man who began his book saying, the fear of the Lord, we read, is the beginning of knowledge. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. And he goes on to say, a wise person obeys God's commandments, for this is the whole duty of mankind. Now, it doesn't mean we have to obey all of those traditions built up around God's commands that have risen in history. Think of Jesus' criticisms of the traditions of the Pharisees, or all of the changes we've accepted in history in the church about moral living, but rather to accept those core teachings of Scripture that God has built in his moral code. Throughout the book, the teacher keeps giving us hints of where he's going to go. In chapter 2, he says, a man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? So ultimately, even if we have questions about our work, we should view it all, he says, as a gift from God and enjoy its fruits. Chapter 3, you recognize it. There's a time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven. So ultimately, even if we have questions about things in our lives, we should understand, he says, that God has a plan and timing for the world, and that the events fit all into it, the events of our lives. Or chapter 5, he says, then I realized it's good and proper for a man to eat and drink and to find satisfaction in his toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given him, for this is his lot. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot and be happy in his work, this is a gift from God. So ultimately, even if we struggle, he says, with the things in life, we need to back up and should see that life is a gift from our gracious God, and enjoy our eating and our drinking, our work and our play, our wealth and our possessions. The complex wise man then really teaches that even after all the questions, surely it is better to fear God and keep his commandments than to walk in foolishness. And as we have heard, the path of the fool does lead to destruction and death, but the path of the righteous, he says, does lead to life. Believing in God, accepting his plan and timing, walking on his path is still the best way to live, he says. You remember that's how Job ends too, right? It says that God was angry with the traditional wise men who hurt Job with their words. And then later all of Job's friends who had previously deserted him, it says, came and they ate with him and they comforted and consoled him over all the trouble the Lord had brought on him. And each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. And the Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the first. In the end, he talks about his sons and his daughters and how they're more beautiful than anyone else in the world, and he talks of his immense wealth. So while life seemed meaningless for a while, it's still better, said the teacher, to fear God and to keep his commandments. And he concludes by telling us that in the end, all of life's questions, both good things and bad things, will be answered. Everything will be made clear. God will judge it all, making clear what is right and what is wrong and how it all fits together. Our empty chasing after the wind will end in meaning that makes sense and fits God's plan. And I find comfort in that. And knowing that someday all my questions will be answered and all will be made clear. Said a bit differently, all of our questions need to be seen through the lens of heaven. When we include heaven in our research, then things can start to make sense. Both traditional and complex wisdom ultimately lead us to Jesus, who is the superior wise man. We believe that Jesus' death upon the cross and his resurrection was the triumph over the natural order of things. Death has been conquered, and the curse has been defeated, and eternal life is now possible once again. And Jesus' death removed our breaking of that moral code. Our sins are now forgiven. We are free. God has answered our prayers, for we are saved. God now walks on the path with us. Wisdom then includes the cross and the empty tomb. But we go even further. Jesus instructs us clearly about wisdom for life's path. We've been to the classroom of our elders. We've been to the classrooms of seminary and grad schools and the other wise people we know. Now we should go to the hillside of Galilee and listen to our Master combine it all. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now you hear the questions in that, but you also hear the answers. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? So Jesus teaches us that life's path is upside down for much of the ways of this world. Walking with him ultimately comes into a surrender, a letting go, a sacrifice. Uniting with him in his ways brings us the meaning and joy. Oh, Jesus still wants us to listen to the traditional and the complex wise men, but he wants us to do so following him down through the narrow gate down life's path. He wants us, as it says in Hebrews, to run our race, keeping our eyes on him, the author and perfecter of our faith. All wisdom leads to him, and then to his love, and to loving him above all and our neighbors as ourselves. When we are walking in the light, in Jesus' footsteps, going through the cross, through the empty tomb, and down life's path, then it can make sense and can be fulfilling. So ultimately, we have to simply settle into the grace of God in Jesus Christ. We can spin our minds into a web. We can get frustrated trying to fully understand, and we should keep asking those questions and pursue it. We can feel often like it's blowing in the wind, but then we hear Jesus say, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." resting, and then walking with Jesus is our ultimate wisdom for life's path. One of the things that I enjoy most in life is eating and drinking and conversing with friends around a table. I find that listening to my friends about their lives and hearing their story and what they have learned in life is deeply enriching. I had a Russian Orthodox lawyer friend for 46 years who recently died. We talked deeply about life. His wisdom enriched me. I miss him a lot. I'm walking through life encouraged by wise friends. As we walk with Jesus on this path, let's walk hand in hand, heart and mind, with other wise people. We can find deep enjoyment as we eat and drink and share life with one another. Think of those evenings of mutual fellowship, those picnics, those dinners. They are God's gifts to help you attain wisdom. And wisdom is God's gift to us, the teacher says. So won't you seek it out and heed God's wisdom for life's path? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you have revealed in your word from all kinds of experiences and stories of life the wisdom by which we are to live. And that wisdom became incarnate in Jesus Christ. And now we are to take it within us and to walk with him. Bless us with friends that are wise, that we together might walk following you. In Christ we pray. Amen. Our hymn of response is God of grace and God of glory.
Glory
bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and grant you his peace.